Welcome, travelers, elves, gnomes. Welcome to the Vizaural Music Podcast, the music podcast where we go deep into the minds of Bandcamp and SoundCloud to find the ghouliest, darkest, evilest realms of the universe to bring to your ears. I am Ryan, the Druid. This is Craig, the Paladin.
I couldn't be a giant?
No. You can be level 2 Paladin. You're going to die on our first mission.
You can be a giant paladin, asshole.
Yes.
Okay. What's a paladin?
And on
my
hell,
God.
the dwarf.
Wait, let's go.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. So
I hate this already.
Oh, you can't see because it's a podcast, but right now we are dressed to the T.
Yes.
I am wearing my full Lord of the Rings garb. So is Anya. He's got a giant bushy beard. You know, he's got his axe in hand. We're ready for
I've got
high
3
adventure.
tunics on. Yeah.
3 tunics. That's how committed he is to this. And
Wouldn't that be a 3-nick?
God damn you.
you know what? Those kind of puns are not in this type of music. All right, this is very serious stuff.
Yeah.
And in fact, today
I could barely get that out because I could barely get that out because I was laughing so hard.
Very good. There'll be no laughing in this episode, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Because
this is
we are
serious
dealing
shit.
with very serious stuff here. Like Ono mentioned, that we've done some Bring On the Hits episodes in the past where rather than getting 7 tracks from Bandcamp or new submissions, we kind of just talk about some songs that were important to us or whatever. We decided we were going to play with that a little bit and that we were going to do, I wouldn't say a deep dive, but a dive into a type of music that you can find on Bandcamp that probably if you are not on Bandcamp or you have not fallen down this rabbit hole, you will have never heard of, but we want to expose it to you because, well, I and Ano at least have been listening to a lot of it. And the style we're going to be focusing on today is something called Dungeon Synth. Now, Ano, before we had the idea for this episode, had you ever heard of Dungeon Synth before? I think a couple weeks ago I was sending you some of these releases.
No, never. Not until you sent me the stuff. And then I was in love.
What was your initial reaction to this? Because we're going to talk a little bit about the background of the music, where it comes from, its problematic origins, like a lot of stuff. But now this is the kind of stuff where immediately you're going to see the cover. You're going to already have a sense of what the hell this is. And you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it right away. You're just going to be like, no, not at all. Get out of here, you nerds. Or you're going to say, yes, give me more. Put it in my veins. So what was your feeling like when I sent you some of these releases?
Well, you sent us the links over text in our group chat. And, of course, you know, when you send a link, it shows you the album cover. And I saw the album cover and I was like, yeah, I'm in. I'm totally in. Like, I'm already in right now. And then it's called Dungeon Synth. Like, hello, I fucking love... Well, I don't love dungeons, but I love fantasy.
So if there's 2 things on Hill loves.
Sex dungeons? Wait, can we say that? I forgot. Did we get censored? And synth, since like, yeah,
we just can't put it in
it.
the title. We just can't put sex in the title.
So obviously I'm on board for this. I love this stuff. Onel immediately was attracted to it as well. But Craig, when we brought this idea up to you, what was your initial thoughts when you heard of this amazing style called Dungeon Synth?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's get to the origins.
Okay.
No, I think like Angel said, the artwork was cool, but like I knew kind of what it was going to be like, sound like, and it's definitely not something that's in my wheelhouse anyway. And then I listened to it, I realized, yep, it's still not in my wheelhouse anyway. But I will say, I watched a short documentary that you sent, Ryan, on this, and
we'll put that in the show notes as
it
well.
was actually kind of interesting, like for some, like just to kind of tear apart this sub micro nano genre, like to down to like these are the founding people that started this process, even though they didn't even have any idea what it wasn't named until 10 years ago, and it started in 1987. Like shit like that is very,
and even
very
better.
cool.
That's like maybe 100 people have purchased some of these things. Like they might be the founders of a genre, but it's such a niche, small community that because we follow Bandcamp a lot, anytime we go somewhere on a Bandcamp site and there's like 50 people are into this. We're like, well, this has got to be a huge thing. But this is
the
like
Beatles.
the most. I know it's like a perfect example, the distillation of how Bandcamp can create these little universes of a style where they just build off each other and they go in strange new spin-off directions of Dungeon Synth, and yet it'll be completely unknown and totally inaccessible to anyone else. And I just think that's brilliant.
I have a theory about, and we'll talk about it later, I think, but I have a theory about why Craig doesn't like this music. And it's maybe a crazy theory, but it's just my theory.
Okay, let's get to that.
Theory about why I don't like this music?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm excited for you to tell me how I feel.
Shut up.
Yeah, I'm very excited for you to not validate my feelings and on hill splain the way I feel.
Well,
it's usually,
that's 'cause he's a higher
right.
level than you.
Yeah.
He has the wand of believing.
I have
and you
higher
don't.
intelligence. I have higher intelligence too. One of my tunics gives
should've
me
rolled better.
gives me plus 30 to my intelligence.
It's true.
I was going to say, well, I was basically Santa Cruz on hill for Ryan, so it makes sense that you would know how I feel and operate.
That's true.
Very true. Well, for those of you who don't know what Dungeon Synth is, let me give you a little primer here, and we'll kind of talk about at least what can be identified as its like earlier precursors, the people who've made the initial releases, all that. But Dungeon Synth, it's a genre of music, of course. It's a type of electronic music that merges elements of black metal and dark ambient. And the style emerged in the early 1990s, predominantly around members of the black metal scene, such as Mortis and Burzum. And do either of you recognize at least one of those names?
Yes.
I imagine some of the people listening probably do.
Yep.
I actually
think we both know the same
recognize
person.
both of the. Well, no, I knew
Ooh.
of both of the people.
That's pretty good.
Mortis
I only
because it's just a cool name, and the guy like just his weirdness about him, and dressing up like an elf and shit like that. And then the other guy because he's a literal Nazi who killed somebody.
Yeah, and I mean,
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. And if you don't know anything about black metal scene, you probably
It shouldn't
do.
be too
Listen
shocking
this
to
show.
hear that there's a Nazi murderer involved in there. Not somebody that murders Nazis. A person
No.
that is a Nazi who murders somebody. The first
Yes.
one, kind of okay.
And it's from Norway.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
another not very shocking thing.
even people who don't know or don't listen to the music, they probably know of the Norwegian black metal scene from the late 80s, early 90s, because it is the scene that, when we were growing up, and I remember in the 80s, you'd see, like we've talked about this before, an Iron Maiden t-shirt or some other heavy metal thing, and it looked really scary. And I thought, oh man, that's got to be like really satanic and evil. I can't listen to that. And then I realized later, oh no, this is just like silly,
Yeah.
fun, like riffy stuff. It's fun.
The first time
Now-
I heard Iron Maiden, I was like, wait, this is that band?
Yeah, exactly. And that's good. I mean, that's how it should be, right? It's like we like to play with the iconography of like horror movies and stuff, but it's silly and we know it's silly and who cares. Now, the black metal scene in Norway, they created this style and they really wanted it to be very lo-fi aesthetic. You've all seen pictures of the covers, the corpse paint face masks and, taking your pictures in the Norwegian snowy woods. And it's still silly. It's super silly, in fact, but at least some of the people who were part of that scene in the very beginning, they really wanted to live up the dangerous elements of it. And this guy, Burzum, he was in Mayhem, which is one of these influential early heavy metal, black metal acts, ends up killing a member of his own band. Earlier, he had taken a picture that was the cover of a Mayhem record with an earlier, I think it was a singer in the band who killed himself. And he found his body and took a picture, and that became the cover. Like pretty messed up shit.
The guy that was murdered, Euronymous, he was the one that took a picture of Dead, who was the singer that shot himself, and they used that as some like bootleg that was released later.
Yeah, and in fact, that might have been one of the reasons why he was eventually murdered, because then the other members of the group, like this guy, Burzum, I don't actually know his real name, but whatever, who thought, well, he's making me look like I'm not as hardcore, I'm not as tough, and so that might have gone into his eventual murder of his bandmate. He was also involved with the burning down of a bunch of very old churches in Norway, just like kind of pretty evil stuff, and it was, of course, the tabloids loved it, the press loved it. I'm sure my parents heard about it and was like, oh shit, we got to keep this stuff away from our sons. And thankfully, I mean, it sounds like garbage for the most part. So like my 13, 14-year-old self would have heard it and would have been like, No, this sucks. I don't want to listen to it. Yeah. I've come to appreciate black metal and its aesthetic and its kind of stylistic choices later, but I think actually there have been better bands who have done it. And then I don't have to buy the Nazi stuff, but like, I think Craig had already brought this up earlier in our text where he said something akin to, oh, isn't it great that we're going to do a whole dive into a type of music which has like its foundation is in this Nazi, because we joke on the show that we often get stuff from Eastern Europe and it kind of has some iconography that could be fascist and we can't really tell because we don't know Polish or Czech or whatever, and we just have to hope for the best. Like, we know right here, this guy, oh yeah, he's a straight up Nazi and he is the foundation or one of the foundations for this style. So how do you feel about that, Craig? I mean, does that completely skew your opinion of Dungeon Synth, knowing that one of its founding records is this guy who's, a bad Nazi?
Well, there's that, and the fact that the music's not good. But no, that's a joke. Some of the stuff that we're gonna play is actually kind of nice to listen to or put on, kind of as like a background thing. But I think what kind of saves Dungeon Synth from like being like, oh, it was founded by a Nazi, is that it didn't get its name, like we said, until like 10 years ago. And the people that were like the initial quote unquote pillars of the genre and stuff weren't like, they didn't consider themselves, oh, this is Dungeon Synth or whatever, or like they didn't have like a specific style in mind. So it's more or less like these albums are like the first time where it kind of sounds like what it sounds like now. And like they just like put those as like the tipping off point. But even that documentary that you sent us like talks about how, oh, some people say that it started as like the weird like synth driven like musical interlude parts of like a lot of like black metal or dark metal, and people just expanded on that. And then others are like, oh, it actually came from like weird German like new wave stuff, like kind of more of the dark ambient side of things, where it has no relation to metal. So like if you want to like remove the whole Nazi murderer thing, you're just like, oh well, actually I think that Dungeon Synth comes more from this other style of ambient electronica that never had its rootings in black metal, and you're fine. So you can talk yourself away from Nazis, which you always should, or punch a Nazi, which you always should.
Oh, like Captain America.
Let me explain a little bit more.
That's right.
Yeah, go for it, Arno.
No, you just called me Captain America.
I just said like Captain America. He punched Hitler.
And now we talked about black metal being, at least some would argue, the early kind of roots of what would later become Dungeon Synth. And let me explain a little more here, that the genre of Dungeon Synth, it employs generally the aesthetics and themes that are typically associated with black metal. And that's where I think the one like the Burzum connection is there. Because there's plenty, like you mentioned, there's lots of different synth and ambient music that existed way before this. We're going to talk about video game music as well, which I think probably has even a deeper connection to like where the people are making this come from. But the visuals of it often do kind of match up with what you'd see on a black metal cover. And you know, it's rather than it being kind of juxtaposed with the black metal, the blast beats, the harsh shrieking vocals, oftentimes it's just that synthesizer sound, and it's very soothing, and it's kind of just I don't know, it sounds more like film music than it is this kind of like, my reflection of being dark and in this evil world. And I think it's hard to avoid the fact that Dungeon Synth, generally speaking, although I know some people have argued against this, that it's often paired with medieval and fantasy motifs. That pretty much from the 1990s onward, some of the kind of contemporaries of Dungeon Synth, they might reject the prevalence of those high fantasy themes. But come on, man! Like this is video game music intended for things like Final Fantasy and stuff like that. I mean, I imagine that's where you had a connection to it, right? You're like, oh, I can hear the roots of this in the JRPGs I played back in '93.
Oh yeah, I mean, like a lot of the things that okay. So here's the thing, like a lot of the stuff that you sent us when I was first hearing about Dungeon Synth it's more recent, so it has a lot more of that kind of like medieval kind of sound to it. And as I looked more into Dungeon Synth, I was like, wait, a lot of these, like, when I'm on Bandcamp, a lot of these covers have like a very black metal kind of look to them. And I kind of realized, I kind of noticed from that there's a lot of black metal influence, you know. So I would say like a lot of the stuff that most of the stuff that I'm listening to that's Dungeon Synth is more the newer stuff that is definitely like video game influenced. I mean, a lot of them could definitely be just a video game made 20 years ago or today. I mean, it just fits in. It's just very, like, a lot of it's serene and very, you know, calming if you're playing like a, you know, adventure game where you're just exploring. You know, it's just something that you can listen to in the background while you're doing that stuff and having adventures in some video game or whatever.
Yeah. And Craig brought up that there's debate about, like, well, where is the true roots of this? Or, I mean, like any type of music, it's probably a lot of things. But we're going to play here a track from Jim Kirkwood, Where Shadows Lie. This is kind of what a lot of people say is a kind of direct connection to different synth trajectory. Like, it's not from the black metal community. This is more of the ambient synth stuff, something that was published in 1990 that probably had a lot of influence on the people who made this stuff. So I shared the whole record with you because, of course, it's always like cut as one long, beautiful soundtrack. But what did you think of Jim Kirkwood's Where Shadows Lie?
Well, I guess technically the entire album is 2 tracks. So even though you sent us a 60-minute YouTube clip, it's like a 40-minute and a 20-minute track. So it kind of, it's long as anyway. But I kind of like that it's. I was listening to this and like, and then like noticed when it came out, like, you know, around 1990, you're like in the time of like 8-bit synthesis, like 8-bit music on video games and everything like that. It was kind of funny to hear how this obviously had more than just 8 bits of sound to it and everything else, because when you're making music, you have more, especially electronic music at the time, you weren't stuck with one small tiny little, you didn't have 4 bits of information that you could deal with or whatever. So I kind of liked how this was really like more, it felt more like 16-bit or like early 2000s, late 19, it felt like very proto JRPG music before they really took off in like the mid to late 90s. So I liked that. And I did like the more, like you said, it's more direct line from just the synth world and not than the electronic world and not the black metal world. So it was kind of fun, and I skipped around a bunch to it because it's a 60-minute song. Everything else that you sent was super long too, so I'm like, well, I'm not going to spend 4.5 days listening to this to talk about it for. Yeah, I know. Well, that's because you're a fucking loser. But yeah, I did think it was kind of cool. But again, it's like, for if I'm going to listen to something that this does, which is just kind of background mood music that kind of just gets you to feel a certain thing, I'm going to listen to something a little different. But it's understandable why something like this would be popular, at least, or why it's like kind of cultish.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Arno? What did you think of this, Jim? I don't know, did you know who Jim Kirkwood was before this? Or?
No, I hadn't come across that like in my searches. So there's a weird thing actually about this one, because whenever we're doing our shows and there's bands, I always go to Discogs. I just like to go to Discogs and look up stuff. And if you don't know, Discogs is a really great database of just, artists and all their releases, and it has singles, EPs, albums, compilations, live bootlegs, all kinds of stuff. It's really great. So I looked up this Jim Kirkwood, and I looked up this album because I was curious, like, what it had been released on, physically. And it had been released on a cassette, actually. It's like a self-produced cassette and like a CDR, it says, on Discogs. But on Discogs, it only has like 8 tracks, and the times for them are kind of short. So, and they have titles. And so I'm and then I went to his Bandcamp, and his Bandcamp has this album in 2 parts, like Craig said. So I'm kind of curious if, like, I don't know, it seems kind of weird. Like, I'm wondering if maybe like the one that's on Bandcamp and YouTube is maybe like a redone version of this old one, because the original album is only like 44 minutes long, and there's distinct tracks with titles. One of the titles is like Smaug. It's pretty funny. I was like, oh, what a dork.
Fucking nerds.
Yeah. So, but all that confusion aside, what exactly am I listening to on this link that you sent me? Is actually the album? Because I'm sure a lot of this stuff gets kind of jumbled from old cassette releases from 30 years ago. I did really enjoy it, though. I really liked it. I thought it was it's just this really calming, great, interesting synth work, and it's just doing a lot of interesting things, I think, in it, like really good soundscapes. And this is totally like up my alley. This is the sort of stuff I like to listen to if I'm just kind of wanting something in the background, or I mean this is the kind of stuff I would listen to like intently too. I would just listen to this as well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy that he did, if this is the album from the 90s, like this is so good for being just one person making music in the 90s. Like it's just kind of amazing.
Arguably, who is buying into this shit now? But like, who is buying that in 1990? I just can't think of anything more out of sync with the larger culture. But
grunge is about to break. There's the hair metal scene, like, and then there's this guy making
Smaug,
making like computer game music without the game.
It makes me think of like, what would our lives have been like in the 1990s if Bandcamp was around?
Yeah.
Like, we would have found we would not have been so locked into a lot of the terrible mainstream music that was at the time.
I think this artist would have proliferated if there had been a Bandcamp back then, or if they were just making this music now. Like, this is something that would definitely be what we say is popular on Bandcamp.
And let me play for you, because I'm going to definitely argue against. We're going to play a song later on from from Mortis, who's considered one of the founders of Dungeon Synth, and he's argued against the idea that video game music, that's where they have the roots of Dungeon Synth. And I think that's total bullshit, and that's just the kind of thing you say because you don't want it to sound like you have like a cheesy style. Let's play. This is the intro to Final Fantasy III. I know Anil knows the song well, and if you've even seen any YouTube videos, you've probably seen this intro. It's on the Super Nintendo. It was very impressive visually for the time. And of course, the soundtracks are great to these games, and there's no way you can hear that and not think, oh, this is basically like Dungeon Synth. They even have like the sounds of like the background of the snow and shit like that. I'm like, oh, man, come on. Like, this is the early roots of Dungeon Synth. Am I right, Craig?
Oh, yeah. I would definitely say that they're video game music, the synth, and part of, I can understand why Mortis would say something like that, because one, like synth-heavy music, when you're making a video game, what kind of music is going to be? It's going to be made with synthesizers, obviously, because you can't do live instrumentation to put it on a digital media at the time. So it's going to be MIDI based, it's going to be synth based. You're going to be dealing with a lot of those constraints, so I can see why he'd be like, well, no, it's not really from that world, but they're using like the same technologies to make both things, so there's going to be a big overlap in the sound. But then you hear the Final Fantasy III stuff where it's like you said, the actual it's not just the sounds, it's the melody and the feel of it more than just, oh, well, obviously you have to have this whatever MIDI sound in it because that's the only thing that we could use. But it's the same feel and everything of what, even when we get to the Mortis stuff, that you can kind of, you hear it, and it's like, I can see like he probably isn't making quote unquote video game music, but he's making music for that would fit into a video game. You know what I mean? You can't get around it.
Mm-hmm. And getting us to this Mortis track we want to play here in a second. Mortis, a little more background. He was a member of Emperor, again, another black metal band. Ends up putting out a solo release, and it's kind of bookended by these synth tracks. And so that's where some people start to say, oh, is that like the beginning of this Dungeon Synth? Even though the rest of the solo record is pretty much black metal. The same thing that Burzum did, where basically kind of bookended by this kind of stuff. And actually, Burzum, this always blew my mind, is that after he murders his bandmate, goes to jail for it. Norwegian prisons sound a lot nicer than American prisons, because he was able to continue to record music. Now, I guess you couldn't get like, a drum kit and your guitar, but they would give you synthesizers, and he puts out a whole record while in prison, which is basically a kind of dungeon synthy record, which is all, again, maybe it's the limitations where just like those video game soundtracks, they had to use the synthesizers because, well, that's the sound chip that this machine has. And so that's what you have to use. Here he is in prison. You got to use this tool. And so that's just kind of what you then create with it, which is very, very strange. I guess that's also the first time where the word quote unquote dungeon is on the record. And that would be kind of informally cited as proto Dungeon Synth, which is the nerdiest thing I've ever said on this show. But let's play that Mortis song here, Craig. Let's play the song, The Long Forgotten Ghost. That's a song, but it's the whole record. But what did either of you, had either of you heard this record? I definitely hadn't before I started doing some research here. But Anno, what did you think of Mortis?
Well, the unfortunate thing is I wasn't able to hear some of these last few songs, just based on time constraints. But you didn't ask me about the Final Fantasy one, which I could have given you more information about.
Well, tell us about that. I mean, who cares about Mortis? It's fucking Final Fantasy.
Well, I was going to say, well, first of all, I have to be an asshole. It's Final Fantasy VI. I know it's called Final Fantasy III here, but numerically it is the sixth game, and in Japan was released as such. But, I think the first nine Final Fantasy soundtracks were done, like, all by the same person, Nobuo Uematsu, and he's amazing. He's like a fucking genius. And throughout the Final Fantasy series, the music kind of progresses and it becomes, a lot more electronic as the series itself becomes more modernized. A lot of the early Final Fantasies were very, the first six especially. The first six were like medieval, very medieval. So those songs have a heavy medieval kind of sound to their soundtracks. And even in just that intro that you gave us, like, it's got a really great like organ, like cathedral organ in the intro. Not something that you hear very often, maybe in a Castlevania game, that'd be it. In soundtracks, and it's it's got a very like plucky kind of mandolin or lute sound in a lot of the songs, and whistling kind of sounds. It's really cool. And he actually kind of went back to that sound for Final Fantasy IX, which is kind of a throwback game itself. And that soundtrack is really amazing because it's very medieval sounding. There's a lot of really great instrumentation. And by that time, the series was on the PlayStation, so you were able to do like CD quality music with really good instrumentation, sometimes live instruments, like orchestral arrangements and stuff like that. So that's a really good, I think if you were to listen to that album, you say, oh, there's a lot of Dungeon Synth influence from just this game soundtrack itself.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I would definitely argue that more people have been influenced by those soundtracks or like-minded soundtracks than probably a lot of the things that we're listing here as the proto Dungeon Synth stuff. Yeah. But Craig, how about Mortis? Did you listen to some of this, which considered the first Dungeon Synth album?
Yes, I did. I did my job, which well, it's not really a job, is it?
Look, we had a day, and I was literally busy all day yesterday.
I know Ryan was slacking, that son of a bitch. And this time it was Ryan and not Angel. Don't.
This is important here.
No. I'm going to talk about.
No, let him speak. Let him speak.
Wait,
Let him speak. Let him speak.
I want to explain the how Dungeon Synth. I was in the countryside, which doesn't have a very good internet connection, and it's really difficult when all of your songs are 80 minutes long to like stream everything. I was just like, oh god, it's crushing this internet connection. So it was a little slow. If we would have done like a bunch of, I don't know, like just super crunchy speed metal, it could have been done in like 30 seconds because the songs are so short. Anyway, Craig, talk about Mortis.
But yeah, I love that, especially like obviously Mortis is definitely influenced by black metal. Right.
Yes.
And I just love that that this type of stuff is considered an offshoot of black metal because it just shows you how nerdy and dorky metal music really is.
Oh yeah.
It's just nerds being dorks playing music about dragons and skeletons and like, oh Satan, blah, blah, blah.
It's probably a generalization, but it's just a bunch of dorks that were like probably made fun of for liking that stuff, right? And now they're angry.
Yeah,
oh for sure.
And then they're like, well, no, it's actually really heavy and hard. And then they just played like super like weird metal music, and then they had these like interludes between the tracks that just turned into like ambient works, which is what most of Mortis's stuff was in the 90s, like just long, droning, ambient kind of obviously dark, dungeony sounds, and it's just so funny to be like this dude wearing like prosthetic makeup and trying to look like a vampire elf or whatever the fuck he was, and like, and he's like,
that sounds cool.
This, but he's making this type of music. It's just so funny. It's like the corniest, cheesiest shit, and it's like all these guys think it's so like cool and dark. I love it. Like it's stuff that like this is one of the reasons why metal, the concept of metal to me is so fun and great. But like the actual practice of metal music is so bad.
It's also now like Lord of the Rings since the movies. It is part of our pop culture, but I mean it's always been part of the pop culture. A lot of people. It's not like it was some unknown book,
right?
Tolkien. But the fact that all these bands reference it so much. I'm holding a tape right now. We'll talk about it later. From one of these bands, and on the back of it, oh my god, it's the Eye of Sauron. It's just like this is. I don't know. It's so nerdy, but it's done in such like that is an evil Dark Lord, and that's going to be a center of my piece. I don't know. I just find that so fascinating. I don't know why, but obviously a lot of people also find it fascinating because they keep making this shit. This is a good song, or this is a good record. I don't know which song Craig is playing here.
I don't know. One of them. It's still going on. It's probably by now it's probably faded to zero because we're about to talk about modern Dungeon Synth, which to me actually was more interesting than the older stuff.
Fair enough, and I think that's probably true of a lot of styles, right? Like, well, here's like the beginnings of the blues, but like let's hear somebody who did it really well. And let's
Led
get
Zeppelin
to that track here. This is oh yeah, I mean they perfect.
Led Zeppelin.
Still anything. This is a French artist, very famous in the Dungeon Synth. I put famous in quotation marks here. This is Aaron with Les Sentiments Puissants. Steinberg, he always critiques my really poor French pronunciation, so I'm sure I butchered that as well. But everyone I followed trying to figure out more about Dungeon Synth, they kind of were like, well, sure, Mortis, that might be the beginning, or maybe it's this other synth album from the 90s or whatever. But really, if you're going to find like someone who's had the biggest impact on the style, it's this guy here, this French artist who he's done a whole bunch of stuff. I really liked this record. I thought it also was interesting because in this one, the song I picked, it definitely has black metal in it. Like, this is not just, oh, it's the frog world and I'm the synth as I go down into the into the dungeon. Like, no, there's like that guttural screaming, but it does have, it's again buttressed by all of the synth work around it. So I thought it was kind of an interesting connection to those two styles. But Craig, I'll start with you. I'm not sure if Anno heard this one yet, but Craig, tell us, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I would say the screaming vocals actually did add something to this, like made it feel more real, I guess, as a track, and not as an ambient work of music, but it actually felt more like a work of music. And that's not to downplay ambient music, because I personally enjoy listening to ambient music and making ambient music. But this, like, as a jump, I think as an entry point, works a lot better than here's a 60-minute droning, slow-moving, pulsating track. You know, it's like, here's an actual song that has some movement to it, like there's something that you can actually listen to a little, or glom onto a bit. It's not as repetitive as the video gamey stuff before. So to me, this can stand on its own, and you don't need to, like, visualize, like you said, the frog prince bouncing around trying to slay the evil lords of Azerbaijan or whatever.
That's a real place.
Yeah, is it
they
though?
do have some evil lords there.
Is it though? Is it a real place?
I don't know.
Oh shit! Anhil's standing up. He's getting serious.
So, Anno, did you listen to this one?
I did not, but I will say what I can contribute. What I can contribute here is that I did actually listen to. So a lot of what I was listening to was instrumental, like completely instrumental. And I did come across some that did have some singing, more of like a screaming, I should say, not singing, screaming. And I didn't really enjoy that as much. Just to me personally, like when it comes to screaming, it has to be there's just only a certain kind of type of screaming that I enjoy. I'm not really big on screaming in music in general. And I thought it was kind of like, I think I had just been so endeared to like what I had already listened to that for suddenly to be kind of like jolted with this like screaming, and I was like, ooh, I don't know if I really care for this type of Dungeon Synth. I don't know if this is popular or not. This is like what people prefer. But yeah, I didn't, yeah, popular in quotation marks. But yeah, I didn't enjoy any of that as much as I liked the other, like just the completely instrumental stuff. And I did come across some that had like wordless actual like singing that was kind of supposed to be like, you know, like medieval folklore kind of like singing, you know,
like more
and
choral stuff.
Yeah, and that was kind of cool. I like that. But yeah, the screaming was not a big fan of.
And obviously with all of these Dungeon Synth, even black metal, it's going for a tone that I think you're supposed to feel a certain way. It's trying to capture maybe like almost like a spiritual kind of sensation. And it often does have to do with kind of medieval Europe, or at least the visuals are trying to like get me to feel a certain way that's connected to that time period. Do either of you like that kind of thing, or is that kind of off-putting? I think for some people it just seems, I mean, this is also where, unfortunately, like a lot of fascist roots come in, because there's some romanticism of, you know, this glorious past, these awesome castles, and when men were men, and blah, blah, blah. But I don't know.
When men were men and whites were white.
Well, man, if they further that sentence, that's probably what they would say. I mean, do either of you like that aesthetic? Or is that kind of like, I have to look past that to enjoy the music?
Go for it, Anhil.
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Like, do I enjoy...
I guess a lot of people will say that this is too much about kind of trying to make me feel like I'm in this medieval mystical world of pre-modernism, of, you know, of the woods, and trying to feel old spirits. And that, I don't know, that's both problematic as well as like, or I'm just not really that into that vibe. Like, and if you don't like that vibe, you're just not going to like this music at all.
Oh, well,
like those two things, the aesthetic and the music, go hand in hand in such a clear way that it's almost like you can't divorce them from each other.
Well, like I said in the last episode, I have been really into like this medieval period of time, which is called the 100 Years' War, that happened in in Europe between France and England. I think it's a very interesting kind of historical setting. And I also came across randomly on YouTube this really great channel that will do medieval versions. I think all electronically. I don't know how they're doing it, but electronic versions of rap songs. So they'll have like 50 Cent in the Club, but done like with medieval instrumentation. It's great. I love it. It's so cool. So I think right now
I can't tell if you're being. Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm serious. I'll send you a link. It's pretty cool.
Right.
So I think right now, like, I'm just kind of enjoying like medieval kind of sounding music because I'm kind of enjoying this historical medieval kind of stuff right now. And I mean, I don't think I'm not the kind of person that's going to think about anything that was politically happening at the time. I mean, as far as the music goes, where I would be bothered by any of it. It's just, to me, it's just like, this is this old time kind of music, and it puts me. It makes me think of a certain time frame in history of the world, and other than that, I don't really care.
Yeah, I don't mean like the politics of that moment in time, but
Angel, are you drawn to the medieval
shit.
times because of your love of white supremacists?
Well, isn't that kind of what you were saying though about like whites being white?
I think it's more of like a vision, like I don't know.
I'll
a
take
lot
it.
of right wing
Right,
thinking is just like, it's not even understanding history right. It's just like, I see this picture. I see people do this shit all the time on Twitter where they're like, they show an ad from like the 1940s and they're like, man, America used to be great. And they're like, that's a fucking Sears ad. Like, that was not America then. Like, and so like sometimes these visuals also kind of conjure up a world that's not real, that it is literally a fantasy world. But people will then try to create that or try to think there's something wrong with our modern world based on their understanding of the past. I guess that's what
I understand what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. No, like Angel, I think it's easy for anybody with any sort of intelligence to be able to divorce themselves from the idea that you need to be a white supremacist to enjoy high fantasy or medieval times. Like, it's actually really easy to do that, but obviously you do have to be aware that there is a cultural, or like there is a cultural significance to a lot of alt-right white nationalist types of people that do take on or like glom onto the again, the iconography more so than the actual stories or whatever it is behind it. So like and that's one of the reasons why like it's can be difficult to listen to some of this stuff where like you might be listening to a band that you really like and then it comes out like, oh, this person's actually a terrible piece of shit, and it's like, well, I guess I'm not surprised by it, but
looking at you, Johnny Rotten.
Yeah,
but hey, look, he let you know what he was like in his name.
That is true. He is pretty rotten next to us.
Yeah,
he was upfront about it.
Yeah, but yeah, like I think like the concept of like medieval times and the
restaurant
about the restaurant. I know.
They're unionizing. You should know that. So
I know, it's actually really cool.
Good for them.
Because apparently it's a very dangerous workplace.
It looks like it.
Yeah. But no. So like the idea of like dragons and dungeons and like skeleton warriors and things like that. It's cool images. Like right. Like you don't have to, like, as nerdy as it is to say, and I'm a nerd, it's still like, when done well, like it's something that looks cool. Like you can. But it doesn't, like, it obviously doesn't have to be grounded in white supremacy. I mean, it's very easy for it to not be.
For sure. I guess I kind of play my hand a little bit, or show my hand here, is that, like, I don't know, when I've been listening to this, I don't see it as just like, oh, that sounds really cool, or it sounds like a video game song. Like, I don't know, I'm constantly trying to have, like, a spiritual connection to the world, and it's something I've never quite been able to do. I don't know if my mind is.
Oh shit, Ryan, is this turning you into a white supremacist?
No, but it's more like when I walk in the woods, I want to feel like I'm connected to this world, and like I don't have like a specific deities or anything. I'm just like I just want to feel like connected to something bigger. And I have kids, and I'm trying to like get them to have that sense too. But I can't find it. But the only way I can do it is via music, and it kind of just put me in a space where I feel like I see the Toad God, and I'm being stupid about that, but it's just almost like that's something that exists in my mind that I don't know. I'm not being very clear about it, but
does the Toad
I
God
understand
tell you
how
to do
this
things?
serves a greater purpose. Say it again.
Does the Toad God tell you to do things, or?
Yeah, he said that. I should buy more Bitcoin. I thought, all right, well.
Oh, I would love that. So. I would love to have like the figments of some demented person's reality is just like, or imagination rather, is just like telling them to do like just the dumbest things. Like, you should donate money to organizations that are helpful to orphans. Oh, okay.
Yeah. NFTs, more NFTs.
Yeah,
Let's get to
those
our
just wait. Like, but to speak of like the spirituality point and all this stuff. Like, yeah, obviously the universe, like in life and all this other shit, is truly meaningless. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's an accident, and we're here, and we won't be. So, like, it makes sense to try and glom onto something that gives it more meaning, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing. It's not a negative thing, and it doesn't make you or anyone else lesser of a person. But like, I mean, I do the same thing with stuff. Like, you feel a connection to things, and you want to pursue that. But again, if that connection to the thing is driven by hate and violence, then it's bad.
And
but
I guess
if it's
that's where
driven by like trying to connect yourself to like your kids and the world and nature and shit like that, that sounds like it's okay, Ryan.
And I guess that's where I understand like Mortis and people saying like this is not video game music, because like when you think oftentimes video game music, it's like, oh, that's just the music in the background of a game that's disposable, and you're like, no, I'm trying to give you a connection to something. You don't want it to be. I mean, I don't have a problem with video game music being spiritually.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a derogatory term to say it's just video game music. Because like On Hill listens to a ton of OSTs. Like, you listen to OSTs to shit like that. Like, it's nothing. Like, it's still music, and it's still there to drive home emotion and feelings and like stuff that's happening within the game. Like, it's no different than like soundtrack, like classical scores to like movies or whatever. And like people that try to say that it is completely different are just shitheads. But like, so yeah.
And I'm glad you said that, Craig. It makes me feel better that I bought all those NFTs after that frog god told me to do so.
Oh, I did not. I was not condoning that.
Thank you for that.
You know what? I'm going to do it now.
Here. Yeah, I know. See, I'm spreading the gospel of the Frog King. Let's listen to.
Can we get Frog King NFTs?
Can we get Frog King as a guest in the future?
Oh, for sure. I'll call him up next time I'm in the woods.
Yeah, that'd be great.
To his track.
Yeah.
Let's get to this next track. This is from Moss Keep, the record, The Curtain of Time. And we could talk about this track, but I think this song is a perfect segue into something else that is very distinct with Dungeon Synth, which is the medium with which they like to release it. And y'all know I love my cassette tapes, but there's actually a really good reason why Dungeon Synth is often on cassette tapes, other than, of course, it's very easy to make cassettes. You can make like 5 of them, you know, instead of mass production of CDs or vinyl or anything like that. But I've heard a lot of Dungeon Synth people who, they seem a bit younger than us for the most part, like a lot of people making it, they're in their 20s. They kind of miss the whole physical media era, perhaps. Or maybe as kids, they remember DVDs in their house or something. And I think a lot of them are looking for that, again, that kind of cultural connection of, you would have a record and I would give it to a friend who'd listen to it. And, you know, it facilitates that community. And there's something interesting about a tangible object. We all buy physical media, so we're of the believers in that. But I don't know, what do you think, Anil, about just like the reliance on really cheaply made cassettes? Because, man, I'm looking at this Moss Keep tape. It cannot be any cheaper. This is black and white, just Xerox copy tape. It just has the lettering, but it's great. So what do you think about that?
I wonder if it's, or maybe it's because of, I don't know. I think for a lot of people, maybe when they think of fantasy, they think of Dungeons and Dragons, and they think of metal, they think of the 80s, and they think of Dungeons and Dragons, and they think of the 80s, and what was like the really popular physical form. Well, there was records and there was tapes, and maybe for some reason that's just, I mean, tapes have always kind of, well, not always, tapes have recently been very like, I don't know, very cool or hip, or, you know, if you have a little tape collection, you know, it's cool and you can show it off to people, and you have a tape deck. Yeah, there you go.
I'm doing that right now.
So maybe that's the reasoning behind it. You know, it's just part of like the it's like the accoutrement, I guess, of the genre. It's just kind of like, if you're gonna do this is part of it. This is part of being in that world. Maybe I could be wrong though.
Yeah, I think you're right. How about you, Craig? What do you think about the aesthetic physical media choices of the genre.
Do they show any? Did they show any cassette tapes in Stranger Things?
They've got to.
Yeah,
right?
that's probably another reason.
I haven't watched since I think I might have seen season 2, so I don't know what's happened in the last couple.
Me either. There's just a lot
I would
of strange
imagine
things.
they put. Yeah. It's kind of weird that it started off as Stranger Things and it's still just Stranger. They haven't gotten to the strangest.
the strangest things.
Yeah, perfect
It's like
Strangers.
a false advertising.
Or there's like a spin-off called Kind of Strange Things.
Kind of Strange. No,
they ran out of the good ideas, so here's
I think
basements.
Perfect Strangers is a
Oh,
prequel to Stranger
Cosinelli!
Things, right?
Balky can be on it.
Yeah, he's
Don't-
Balky's totally from the Upside Down or whatever. The under is it the Upside Down?
Craig, don't be ridiculous.
You have no idea how often I say that to my family, and thankfully they're too smart to know what that
To
is.
know.
Anyway.
They dump their
I think
80s knowledge.
it's a little ironic that a genre of music built around synthesizers and digital recreation of music is reliant on tapes, cassettes, as instead of like or CDs, I guess, like because CDs would be a little more digital in that respect,
And just as cheap.
They do, and and it's probably cheaper.
Yeah.
Or at least, I mean, I'm thinking probably 20 years ago when you could get like 500 CDRs for like $5,
$50.
It might be a little different now, but and that they do seem to have like it is cool that they have a culture of wanting a physical medium and stuff, but it just seems a little counterintuitive
But
to
it's
choose
also that tapes decay,
versus.
and I think that is
Yeah.
part of it, right? Like,
But
if you play
again,
it too
it's
much, it
music
goes away.
made with literal computers, and they have this weird thing against digital songs. Like I don't, there is some sort of weird thing that just doesn't quite jive. But I like the fact that, like you said, like the idea of tape trading is cool. Like I used to tape trade like live albums and stuff like that. It was a very fun community and like cool to like be like a collector. And if you buy a tape, you can very easily make a copy of the tape and pass it on to somebody else and all sorts of things like that. We don't condone piracy we do. Piracy rules.
Definitely do.
But to get to the song for a second.
Oh my gosh!
I
When are they
love
going to make
that they-
pirate synth?
They have it. Yeah, they probably have it. 100%.
I mean, the fact that you just said it, we got to make it.
I'm gonna
today.
look it up.
Like, we got to get it.
Sorry. Go ahead, Craig.
Please do. But one of the tags was just raw Dungeon Synth. And I love that. Because this
Yep.
Moskeep, guys, it's pure uncut.
Oh wow!
Pure uncut. I'm cutting that out. Speaking of uncut,
That's perfect.
Hilarious.
it's pure uncut Dungeon Synth, you fucking losers.
Yep.
It's also like, to me, this was probably the most boring track out of everything, which is kind of funny to be like raw Dungeon Synth, and it was just like the most like
Too raw. You made it too raw.
yeah, it's a little You might want to cook this one a little bit, get that going a little faster.
Pop it back in
guys.
the music oven real quick.
But
Yeah,
this
it ain't
also,
done.
This does feel like it has a connection, even though it sounds nothing like black metal. Of course, the cover has a very black metal aesthetic, but sounds nothing like it. But the lo-fi quality of it does seem like it lives in that world. So even though it's just like very meandering synths, very light keywork, I don't know, it has that same essence to it, which is why I really like it. That's why I'm holding the tape right here. It's pretty cool.
But it is probably the least dynamic of the stuff that we're covering
Yes.
today on it. So that's the only reason why I found the tag raw Dungeon Synth so funny.
And I haven't noticed a lot of vinyl releases on any of these either. Which I mean, I know it is
Vinyl's
more.
expensive,
I know
man.
it's more expensive, but there's a lot of people on Bandcamp that release records, and I'm pretty sure they don't have a lot of money either. So I'm curious as to maybe if there's a reason why they avert. I wonder if that's part of it, maybe to not do records as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know for sure, but I do want to play this next track here to get into the other ways in which Dungeon Synth has been proliferated through the world. This is probably the one that started this whole journey, this very last track, and this is the one I sent to Onels, I sent to Craig, and Craig was like, oh my god, get this shit out of here. But let's hope he listened to it, now he loves it. This is Tales Under the Oak with Ancient Wisdom of the Swamps. mentioned cassette tapes. We mentioned Bandcamp, and I hope in the future when we do some of these episodes, we'll look into some other very bizarre subgenres that have a huge community that the rest of the world doesn't know, thanks to a place like Bandcamp. But I think probably more than Bandcamp, it's YouTube that really got this music spread about. In addition to that documentary that we'll put in the show notes if you want to learn more about Dungeon Synth, this guy does a pretty good job of explaining it, I think pretty well, and just kind of above board with his descriptions of things. There is a channel on YouTube which basically just kind of streams or puts out these records. And this is how I first came across this. I don't know what I was watching on YouTube that made it sound like I really wanted a tale of the Frog King in the swamps, but it gave me this, and I thought, holy shit, this is awesome. I love this. And I bought it. You know, I wish it was actually had a physical release, but oh no. How about this? Because this is what got this whole show started.
Yep.
This track here.
Yeah, this is the first thing you sent. And when I saw that cover, I was like, oh, I'm in already. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
I love the cover. And I listened to it, and I fucking love it. It's so good. I haven't bought it yet, but I'm planning on it because I've listened to it numerous times. And we can describe the cover to people. Oh, yes.
It's a big frog king done in, a very medieval style. It looks awesome.
Yeah, it's just a really cool looking drawing. I love it. And I would say a lot of the stuff that I've listened to that I found on Bandcamp has been because they have a similar kind of style of cover. If it looks like it has a really cool medieval looking art, I'm just like, yeah, let me listen to it. I'm gonna click on it. But this is really good. I really love this. And this is, a lot of the Dungeon Synth that I've listened to, it's like, it kind of reminds me in a weird way of vaporwave. Hold on. Mm-hmm. But just in that, it's very repetitive. It's just a lot of and it's almost like, you think, oh, did they maybe just sample one part and just run that loop? Maybe, I don't know, but I enjoy it, and I really like it a lot.
Oh, I know they did.
And so a lot of it's this one's very serene. I really like the medieval sound of it, and it's just really cool. And this is also really dorky, but I bought a new edition of Lord of the Rings. And I've been reading it, and I popped this on when I was reading it, and I was like, yeah, this is perfect.
Awesome. Yeah.
Hold up. When you say new edition of Lord of the Rings, they discover uncut, new scenes that Tolkien never released, or is it just
it's
the
just a
same book now and different?
Sex. There's just a lot more sex in it.
George R.R. Martin punched it up a little bit.
It's the director's cut, unrated director's cut of
just a lot more. How he's very detailed. Well, man, wait till he gets to the human body, guys.
Just a can't wait to learn about 15-page description of some elf's labia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I went there.
Rivendell, man, what a place.
But it's great.
Now this music here, this I feel has basically no connection to black metal. It's one of those things where it's now been so 5 steps removed that I doubt this person was listening to any of those things we mentioned at the early part of the show. They were like, oh yeah, I like Lord of the Rings, and I like video game soundtracks. I like just kind of that spacey ambience. That's what it feels like to me. And a lot of the stuff I've been listening to within this kind of Dungeon Synth style is more like this.
Same.
I think it's a little more,
yeah. This is the stuff that I really liked. It hits my spots better.
But how about Craig? Do you think Craig likes a whole record, a theme record, concept record about a frog king?
Well, if there's one thing I know about Craig is that he hates swamps right off. So
he does. He wants to drain them.
Oh yeah, send me to Washington and let me drain the swamp.
Mm-hmm. Put this frog king in charge.
Well, also there was a swamp thing that took his girlfriend.
Might be better off.
It's true.
Say what now? I didn't hear that part. I'll listen to it when.
You'll hear it later.
Yep. Okay.
You'll be laughing. It'll be great.
I'll insert laughter. Hold on.
Treat.
Just wait. I'm gonna add some laughter and then I'll cut it over.
Yeah. Sounds good. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. I was kind of the two new updated or current versions of Dungeon Synth, the
Dungeon
Moss Keep
Sith?
and the Tales. Yes, Dungeon Synth.
Whoa.
That's a new style crossover between Lord of the Rings, Star Wars music. Oh my God. We're on Bandcamp. Let's set up. Start this band.
Anyway.
Let me get my keyboard.
So with the Moss Keep and the Tales
Ryan just went to go get his keyboard. He's left.
Yep.
Got my keyboard.
All right,
Ready?
hold on.
Turn it on here.
Oh god. All right.
No batteries? Great. How am I supposed to make this jam? Damn it. Sorry, Craig. I can't make it right now.
Well, we'll do it later.
Anyway, I was a little surprised at how like ambient focused the Boss Keep and Tales Under the Oak were. Without like they didn't have as much of like the drum machine video game beats that I assumed would have been like a more of a driving force, like with the Jim Kirkwood stuff, and obviously like the Final Fantasy III intro shit, which isn't obviously quote unquote Dungeon Synth, but it just. I was a little more surprised that it leans more heavily into ambient territory, especially like with what Angel said, that kind of reminds him a little bit of Vaporwave in that feel, in that it just gives you the like Vaporwave gives you the feel of the 80s and like cocaine and stuff like that. And like Dungeon Synth gives you the feel of, high fantasy Middle Earth type of
cocaine
stuff.
in the comic shop.
And cocaine. Which, I mean, it is kind of weird. Like, if you listen to this and you didn't know that it was called Dungeon Synth, and you didn't tell somebody that's name, like the name of the bands, which does give away a lot of the feel of what it is, and you ask somebody like, so what feel do you get when you hear this? I think a lot of people would say that they get a feel of like a fantasy epic type of feel to it, which is weird to think about. Like what, like that exists, like because there's that again going back to the documentary that you sent us where it talks about was it Dino Wave or like and different
subgenres.
Yes, exactly. And I listened to it, like there's no way this sounds like prehistoric ambient electronic music, because what the fuck would that sound like? And you listen to it and you're like, if you heard it in and of itself, you wouldn't be like, oh, this is Dino Wave or Dino Synth or whatever. And then, but once you hear that it's called that, you're like, it kind of makes sense in a weird way. So it is kind of funny, that this.
Well, what we think Dino music sounds like, or prehistoric music sounds like.
Right, exactly. But it is kind of funny that, this like hyper small subgenre now has subgenres within its world that just are like, it's just electronic music that aesthetically and aurally give you the feel of X, and it's just X synth.
And some of those subgenres, like when I listened to Dino Synth, and when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I totally get it. Like I'm watching one of those stop motion animation dinosaur movies from the 40s and 50s. I'm like, yes, I hear this. It's amazing how. There's nothing specific. It's not like there's any lyrics or anything like that, but it just captures it so well. Kind of like what you mentioned with this one, that you could give it to anyone. They're going to know what this fits with, which I think is pretty cool. Well, have we won you over, Craig? I mean, I already won Anno over right away. I knew he was going to be into this. But have you been won over to Dungeon Synth as a style? Because I'm hoping our listeners are interested as well. That they're going to go and they're going to click on some of these bands. They're going to explore some of this. And hopefully some of these future episodes, we get people into some other weird genres. So, Craig, did we win you over?
Wait. Before he answers, Ryan, you better roll for luck.
Oh, that's right. Oh, shit. I got killed by a dwarf.
Oh, God damn it.
So Angel killed you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We knew that was going to happen.
That checks out.
Yeah, it's definitely going to happen.
I will say I do enjoy weird micro genres of music, and one of my favorite pastimes to do while trying to find new music on Bandcamp is to go on a weird tag tunnel hole thing where you just like keep on clicking the weirder and weirder and weirder genres that people have listed, and you're like, there's a surprisingly large amount of things that are called X whatever,
Taco
like,
Wave.
Yeah, tippity top
Whoa.
jaw. And you're like, whoa, there's like a community around this, and like, so I like that idea. I do like communities of people making cool music. Well, I'm not going to call this cool, sorry.
Oh, ouch. Harsh.
I don't think they would either.
No, yeah, exactly. No, I did enjoy. I'm a nerd when it comes to music, so even if I don't like the genre or the style, like a deep dive into something like this and talking about the history of it is always fun. And trying to pull out, discuss some of the weird aspects of it is always fun. You're like, oh yeah, like I said, one of the pillars is a guy who murdered somebody and is a literal Nazi. But you
Can
don't
you
have
name
to
a style of
consider
music
him
that
if
doesn't
you don't
have
want
a
to,
murderer?
I know.
or a Nazi in it.
Yep, we're gonna listen to flamenco. Man, a lot of murderers in that music. It's gonna be great.
Well,
pile
yeah,
of bodies.
actually, there would probably be a decent number of fascist flamenco players from back in the day. Yeah.
I'm only half joking about that one.
I know, that's kind of funny to think about.
Hilarious.
But yeah, no,
right.
I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these stupid deep dives into genres that nobody's ever heard about before.
And Ono, is there any other Dungeon Synth that we didn't mention that you came across? You're like, oh, that's really cool, or just we kind of touched upon a lot.
Yeah. There's another one that you sent me that I really liked called Fife, which is just the name of it itself.
Yeah, that was good.
And there's another one there's another one I
Where's the
really
fife?
liked called
Give me that fife.
another one I really liked is by a group called Dim. And the album's called Compendium 1. It has a really cool like a rook or a castle or something on the cover. This looks really cool.
Yeah. Well, we hope you like this dive as well. And if you did like it, or if we missed a really important act, or we got some of the history wrong, whatever, you can send us some messages at vizaralmusic@gmail.com, or you can talk to us on Twitter when we release the episode. If you make your own Dungeon Synth or some weird subgenre, or if you know of even a weirder subgenre that you want us to do a dive into, send it our way. Anything else, gentlemen, before we head off into the cold, dark mines to look for our gold and take it from the breath of the dragon?
Or Balrog.
Or Balrog.
I would say earlier I mentioned the imaginary genre of pirate synth, but then I thought about it and I remembered there is pirate synth. There's a song called "Pirates" by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and it's fucking awesome.
Wow, so that's like the early version. Now people have heard that song and yes, where's my keyboard? I'm gonna find it out. Yo ho ho ho, pirates fight for me.
Well, I
There
hope
it goes.
everybody likes that song because you're listening to it now.